Hey everyone, welcome back to Build. I'm your host, Brittany Jones-Cooper. It's been 60 years since NASA was founded, and in that time, we've seen a man walk on the moon and rovers explore the surface of Mars. In the new film, NASA Above and Beyond, Academy Award-nominated director Rory examines the accomplishments that NASA has made in space and why their work on Earth may have the greatest impact on our future. Take a look.
60 years ago,
we choose to go to the moon.
My uncle put forth a great challenge. Since then, NASA has journeyed far beyond. Today, we face a greater challenge, the challenge that we cannot postpone, one we simply must win.
Everybody put your hands together for Rory Kennedy. I got a little sneak peek of the film, and I kind of expected it to just be like a typical Discovery, very informative sort of thing, and I found myself getting really emotional in it because the topic is something that I've been talking a lot with my friends and family. So for you, why was this something you wanted to explore right now?
Well, it is the 60th anniversary of NASA, and October marks its birthday, so happy birthday to NASA.
Happy birthday.
It seemed like a good time to look back and take measure of this amazing institution, which arguably has brought us more knowledge, more information than any in the history of humankind. And I think it was a combination of that and the fact that my uncle was so instrumental in the vision and implementation of getting us to the moon. You know, this great speech that he gave in 1962 at Rice University, in which he said, we're going to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And we're going to do it within the decade. And this at a time where we didn't even have a rocket ship. You know, it was a very bold, ambitious vision. And with his incredible leadership and the support of the American people and Congress, remarkably, we were able to do that. But, you know, that was probably the most known moment in NASA's history, but the reality is that NASA has done so much in the last 60 years, and they're often in the background and don't take credit for everything that they do, so it was nice for me to jump in the background with them and highlight and bring to the surface some of their many accomplishments.
That was the biggest takeaway for me, and I felt really naive, and I didn't understand just the number of different things NASA does. Why do you think the agency is still so misunderstood?
Well, I think in part it's because of the way the agency is structured. It's a civilian agency, so it is part of the U.S. government. It's run under the executive branch, so under the president's branch of government. But it's really a civilian agency, and it was structured as such. And so all of the information that NASA gathers, they share with people throughout the United States and internationally. And they don't always get the credit for the information that they gather for us. For example, you know, all of the satellites that are tracking our weather system, what we're seeing right now with Hurricane Michael, that is all NASA. And they then give that information to NOAA, and then NOAA gets it out through the Weather Channel and other sources, but the source information is in fact NASA. But they don't take credit, and they don't say, we're NASA doing all of this. And so I think the reality is they're in the background, which is, you know, a great aspect of the organization, but it also, I think they lose some of the credit they deserve.
Yeah, and the amount of work they're doing is extensive. Not only do they have satellites monitoring everything from our oceans to vegetation from space, but they also have people on the ground taking samples and flying over icebergs and doing all of this work. And that's in their Earth Science program.
Yeah,
so explain sort of the work they do
you know,
there.
part of the way that we structured the film is this idea more that NASA has looked outward and helped to understand our solar system and our galaxy, the Milky Way, and then beyond into the deep ends of the universe. The greater they've appreciated Earth and the uniqueness of this planet and how precious it is. One of the first stories that we talk about in the film is Apollo 8. And that was the first mission where we were able to go to the dark side of the moon. So we orbited around the moon. and nobody had ever been to that side of the moon or seen it. And so this was the first mission to do that. And when they wrapped around and started coming back to Earth, Bill Anders and Jim Lovell were two of the astronauts on the Apollo 8, and Bill Anders takes a photograph of Earth, and it's known as Earthrise. And it went viral before we had the internet and went all over the planet because it was the first time we had seen an image of Earth from somebody who took it from outer space. And what he says during that mission is, he says, we went to explore the moon and we discovered Earth. And it's that idea that kind of really directs the film ultimately towards planet Earth, and this idea that the more we've gone out, the greater we've appreciated this planet. And so yes, NASA has had that experience, and in doing so and appreciating this planet, they now have 19 satellites that are orbiting Earth and are helping to document what's going on in all the major facets of this planet. They also have airplanes. I went with them to Antarctica and up to the Arctic, and we filmed in Hawaii, and all the work they're doing on all the continents around the planet, with scientists also on the ground to validate the aircraft as well as these satellites. And with that, and having done that now for many decades, they take all that information, they give it to scientists who put it into computers in these very complex computer programs that create models that help us understand how healthy this planet is. And what those models are telling us is that this planet is in jeopardy, and that we humans, through the emissions of carbon, are destroying this planet. And what these scientists are telling me is that we're on a train wreck. So it's very concerning, and you know, I think the direction that the film goes, and what I believe strongly now, having spent 2 years with NASA, is that this is an urgent crisis of the greatest proportion.
Yeah. You recently wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and in it you sort of quote the Carl Sagan thing that he said, where you said that the satellite measurements are the difference between ignorance and knowledge. So basically what you're saying is, we've had 40 years of them compiling all of this data. They can look at these projections and make very real projections about what's going on, but we're still ignoring it. Why?
Yeah, well, it's concerning.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to me, I think that NASA is full of the greatest minds in human history, and their mission is to gather the information. They are not lobbyists. They are not advocates. So what they do is they then give that information to all of us, and they give it to the legislators and the policymakers. And you know, people ask me all the time, well, what can we do to make a difference? And we can, you know, we can use solar panels, we can use cars that are electric, we can not put our thermostat as high or as low and have a kind of wider zone of comfort, right? So there are many things we can do to contribute, but ultimately, in my opinion, what we need to do is make sure that we are electing legislators who are taking this problem very seriously and are going to impose legislation that changes the direction of human history. Because what these scientists are saying, and I encourage everybody to read the IPCC report that came out 2 or 3 days ago, where the scientists are saying, we are screaming that we have 12 years to change this, and if we don't change it in 12 years, it's going to be too late. Right. That's what they're telling us. So we now need to listen to that, and we need to change direction. The good news is that we have an election coming up on November 6th, and so what I would encourage people to do is vote for people who are committed to this issue and who are going to do what leaders should be doing, which is taking us in a new direction. Nobody wanted to wear seatbelts, but legislation came in and said, you got to wear seatbelts, and now we all wear seatbelts, and it's fine.
In reference to that report from the UN that you just mentioned, President Trump was like, well, I've seen good reports and I've seen bad reports, sort of alluding to the fact that there's a lot of discrepancies out there, which doesn't seem to be the case. So what sort of impact do you think that's going to have on his legacy, that opinion of that it's really not something that's a big deal right now?
Well, I think it's very concerning that our president is not only taking this message very, very seriously from these scientists, but that in fact he's taking us in the opposite direction. So he is taking us out of the Paris Accord, which is the international community's commitment to maintaining and restricting how much global warming we are, able to do in the world. But he's also very supportive of, beautiful, green, clean coal, which what these scientists are saying is we've got to stop using coal because that is just a huge source of carbon in the environment, which is heating our planet, which in turn is creating these crises. And the weather systems that we're seeing are the result of climate change. So that is concerning to me. And, coupled on that is the fact that our Congress, which is, Republican-led Congress, is supporting his leadership and is not questioning it and is not standing up to it. So, at the very least, at this election cycle, we can take back Congress to ensure that the leaders and largely speaking, the Democratic leadership and people who are running, and I've done a lot of research on what their positions are, and a much greater percentage of Democrats are supportive of restricting the amount of carbon in the environment. So I think that that's hugely important. We have a great opportunity coming up in a couple weeks.
It seems like a sort of easy resolution too when you look at it, which would be carbon taxes or things to hold big businesses accountable. Is that what's holding us back, is that it's about money?
Yes, that is a significant issue. So that is what some of the scientists in this report are recommending, is a carbon tax. So the more damage you're doing to the environment, then you're accountable and you pay for that, and you're hopefully incentivized to not continue to do that. And that would be a financial way to incentivize us to kind of pursue a different path and a more healthy path. So that seems to be certainly a great starting point. And there is, great resistance to that. And these corporations, unfortunately, have increasing influence on our elections. And what is in their interest is reflected in the legislation that the leaders who are currently in office are supporting. So I think that's also very concerning, and again, a reason to look at each of the people who you're voting for and look at what their positions are on this, and if they're not pursuing and supporting legislation that is in line, that we fire them. Yeah. And get somebody new in there who's gonna, look out for us and for our children and our children's children, and keep this world, healthy for humans.
Yeah, it's really easy, I think, to get frustrated about it, but I have to have a little bit of hope in that in this political moment we are in, that maybe people are finally hearing it, or do you feel like people are getting more concerned about climate change, or is it still sort of like a weird punchline like it's been for a while?
I don't know. I mean, I hope that enough people are reading the IPCC report, but honestly, it's a little frustrating because then you look at the news cycle and, there's a lot of attention to Kanye West being at the White House, right? So is that more important than our planet not being any longer friendly for life? I don't think so. So, that's where the press goes, is to who gets the most number of tweets or something. So, I'm concerned, and I appreciate you guys giving attention to these issues and having it be, and all of you who are here in the audience listening, and this is more substantive. Yeah. But there's not a lot of programs like this that are available, and so I think that's concerning.
Yeah. It really is concerning, and yeah, I can't talk about it enough. So I'm happy that you made this film, and it's something that I'm gonna definitely push on a lot of friends and family. It's just like, watch this, let's talk about it. Because I did a deep internet spiral after watching it. Like I was just Googling a ton of stuff and looking for ways to help, and so I think it will connect with at least the people who are open to hearing it.
Well, it's great that you know, every person who is helping to sound the alarm helps. So I appreciate your role, which is a really important one because you have a show and you have a microphone and you're on AOL, and that makes a huge difference and you reach an audience. So it's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the you know, beyond the climate change, the film also looks at just the incredible stuff that NASA is still doing in space. Just like side note, I didn't know about the deep field before watching.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite, the Hubble, and it is because we were in sort of a Debbie Downer spiral, so we'll now could become much more aspirational, which the film is in so many respects. So the Hubble is really one of my favorite efforts of NASA, and you know it's so important, I think, too, and one of the great things about doing this film is you're really looking at the span of 60 years, and you know, looking back 60 years ago when we didn't have any rocket ships, we had never gone to outer space, and you know, everything we really knew about the planets and the stars and the universe we knew from the back end of a telescope here on Earth, and then we sent a telescope up to space. You know, it's like NASA does amazing things. I mean, it's a huge telescope that they just sent out into outer space, and you know, the story as it goes, there was a mistake with Hubble. And the size of the mistake was smaller than a human hair on the lens of the telescope. So all of the images came back blurry. So then they had to send up astronauts to go fix it, and which they did, and
which was like a scene out of Interstellar. It was very, I can't believe that was real life.
I mean, it's amazing. And so they sent them up there and they fixed it. And they basically put like contact lenses on Hubble or glasses. And then these images came back, which are just incredible, where you see stars being born for the first time, much like our star, the sun, was born. And you see these incredible demonstrations of light and gas when galaxies collide with each other, and these explosions that happen. And you know, these galaxies that are tens of millions of light years away. But what you're referring to is this beautiful image, which is really one of my favorites, which is the deep field, where they had Hubble look at one area of the sky where they didn't think there was anything. And they had it developed over hours and hours and days, and it was an area of the sky the size of maybe your thumbnail. And it was totally pitch black, and they stared at it for hours and hours. And they, after developing it, found 10,000 new galaxies in that area of the sky. And so what we also know from Hubble and from the NASA research is that, like, our galaxy, for light to go from one side of our galaxy to the other side of the galaxy takes 100,000 years. Right? So the galaxy's really big. And there's hundreds of billions of stars in these galaxies. And around each of these stars are billions of planets, right? So to find 10,000 new galaxies with all of the stars and the planets and everything that comes with it, and that being in this teeny space in the sky, the universe is really, really big.
Guys, I cried when I saw it. I'm not joking. I was watching it and a tear went down my eye, and I was just like, whoa, this is beautiful and amazing. And the fact that Earth can sustain life, and just, it all kind of hit me at one moment. And the images in the film I think are what made me so emotional, is that this beautiful imagery throughout the film.
Yeah, no, it's really breathtaking, and that's one of the powers of, and we tried to really focus on the archival and the kind of visual experience for audiences in making this film, because there are these really breathtaking, awe-inspiring moments, and I experienced that when I was researching it, and I wanted that to be the experience of people watching it. So I'm glad that you got teary. That was my goal. I wanted to make you cry.
Before we go to audience questions, I just want to talk about kind of the future of the space program. I saw in the film that NASA's working with companies like Boeing and SpaceX to create different aircraft that can maybe one day take commercial travel up to space. What do you think about that partnership and how it's going to continue to expand the space program?
Yeah, so I'm all for the partnership. I think actually, something that's largely misunderstood is, and I misunderstood it myself, is that in NASA's history, they've always worked with corporate partners, and so even in the Apollo programs and getting to the moon, they worked with the private sector to help build the rockets, and so that has always been the nature of kind of NASA's history. So it's very much in line. What a number of those private corporations are doing and focused on right now is human spaceflight. So that's something that we haven't done for a good long time, since the space shuttle program, and there was the tragedies with Columbia and Challenger, and after then those tragedies and completing the building of the International Space Station, that the space shuttle was stopped. And so since then, all of our astronauts have gone up through Russia, through the Soyuz, and actually there was just an accident this morning where one of our astronauts and a Russian astronaut had an aborted mission after 2 minutes heading up into space, which they're fine, but it's a reminder of how dangerous it is. And so the idea with SpaceX and Boeing is that they'll start sending up American astronauts from the United States again. And that should happen in the next year or two if everything goes on schedule, which I think is exciting. And I think it will, reignite, hopefully, because I think there is that connection of sending somebody off in a rocket ship up to the ISS or wherever they're going to go. So I'm excited about that, and I think there's a lot of benefits.
I think when you look at the impact that the space race had on unifying people, I think space is maybe the one thing that could maybe bring us back together, all kind of celebrating exploration and ingenuity like that.
Well,
so that's exciting.
We get along very well with the Russians up there. We're not so good at getting along with them here on Earth, but
this is true.
Yeah.
This is true. I think we have a couple questions before we get out of here. Who do you have first?
What areas in space exploration and areas of development of the space capabilities are being neglected right now? Are there any new programs that you might be doing films about? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there are areas that I think could have more attention and focus in terms of what NASA is doing. There is question now of whether we will really aim to send humans to Mars. It's something that NASA is very excited about and committed to, but in order to really do that, you need the commitment from the Office of the Presidency to say, we're going to do this and provide the resources. And I think it's a long-term commitment. It's probably 15 or 20 years out. So you have to also have the vision of thinking ahead and looking ahead and kind of making that happen. My feeling, given the urgency of what we now understand about what's happening here on this planet, is that we should really unleash our scientists to not only help us understand in as great detail as to what is happening in this planet, but also to help us understand what we can do about it. Because I think we know that we need to reduce the amount of carbon that we're releasing into the environment, But are there other ways that we can fix the problem? You know, NASA did an amazing job with the ozone hole. There was a hole. They helped discover it and validate that it was from products that we were creating here on Earth. And they told it to the legislators and the policymakers all around the world, and they stopped CFCs from being produced. And that happened, right? So there's precedent for that kind of legislation happening and the world unifying around these issues. But there may also be possibilities of ways to clean the environment of carbon. I have no idea. But if I were president, I would say to the scientists, help us figure this out as much as you can. Bring in the best minds, not only in this country, but all around the world. Let's work together. And this affects everybody on planet Earth, from Alaska to the Ozarks to Antarctica to the Arctic. It's everywhere on the planet. So let's work together to figure this out.
Next question.
Hi. You speak so passionately about everything regarding NASA and space, so I was wondering, what was the most interesting fact you learned over the course of making this film?
The most interesting fact, well, I'll tell you one that I think might be of interest to this audience, which is that I was just, well, in any case, in the process of the making of this film and coming out with this film, I learned that the computer that helped get Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon took 1 megabyte. That it was 1 megabyte. I know, it's like a photograph. Like, that's how much and it's like this huge computer. And it got a rocket ship to the moon, off the moon, and back, and it was 1 megabyte. So that's kind of amazing.
I mean, I don't even have like a hard drive that's 1 megabyte.
No,
it's nothing.
you don't.
Yeah,
It doesn't really exist anymore. So it's kind of remarkable. And anyway, thought that might be an interesting factoid for this audience to enjoy.
And one last question.
Hi, thank you so much for going out of your way to make a documentary that's really influential, actually, for all of us, because NASA is a big part of our lives. And I was thinking, as broad as NASA is, how do you go about it? What is your process as a documentary filmmaker on deciding what you're going to put into the film and how you're going to organize a timeline for something that could be as broad as a NASA documentary?
Thank you. First of all, thank you guys for all of your questions. They've been really smart, intelligent, and interesting, so I appreciate all of you. It was hard, and it was probably the biggest challenge of making this film is with an organization which has so many disparate efforts, and over the course of such a long period of time, 60 years, to kind of narrow in on what stories to show and to celebrate. Ultimately, we made a decision early on with my team. I work with my husband, who was a producer and writer, Mark Bailey, on the project, and I had a great editor, Don Klesi, and an amazing archive team as well. And we made the decision, and I think it came out of the many interviews I did with astronauts who continued to be amazed by looking back at Earth. And that moment in the interviews was always one of the most powerful for me, as them talking about going to outer space for the first time and looking back at our planet and this thin atmosphere that was protecting us. And then talking to so many of the people who are doing earth science and the urgency of their message. There was one person I interviewed, Pierce Sellers, who talked about how he had an amazing story, because soon before we interviewed him, he got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And so he only had a year to live, and he had just written an op-ed for the New York Times in which he said, I was faced with this challenge and this question of what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, knowing I have less than a year to live, and I've decided that I'm going to go back to work tomorrow. at NASA, because I'm seeing the science and understanding what this message is that's coming out of the science and how definitive it is about climate change. And we are on a train wreck, and if we don't do something, we're not going to be able to survive. Earth will, but we won't. So, you know, it was a combination of those experiences that we sort of narrowed the overall narrative arc on this idea of the more NASA has gone out, the more it's appreciated the beauty and the preciousness of this planet. And in so doing, there were certain stories that were consistent with that overall idea that we narrowed in on. So, you know, of course, for example, there's all of the amazing Apollo missions, and there's Apollo 13, which is an incredible story, and Apollo 11 of actually going to the moon. And there are many of them that have, but we focused on Apollo 8 because that was the first time that they saw the Earth from outer space. And, you know, so some of the stories were determined based on that kind of narrative thread, if that makes sense. And then I also really wanted it to have that visual excitement and wow. And so some of the stories I also determined based on the images that came out of it. So, you know, like Hubble is an amazing scientific feat, but also the images were so breathtaking that I absolutely was going to tell that story because I'm in a visual story frame in the way that I you know, approach making films.
I think the film did a great job at showing how vast the universe is, our place in it, and how we really don't have time to play around anymore with climate change. And so I'm hoping a lot of people do take the time to check it out and just ask questions, keep asking questions and talking to their legislators about it, because it is something that we need to deal with now.
And vote.
Yeah, and vote, guys. If you want to check out the film, NASA Above and Beyond airs on Saturday, October 13th on the Discovery Channel. Please give it up for Rory Kennedy.
Thank you all.